New Horizons. Chapter 1. The Final Betrayal. Isabella sat in the dim light of the bedroom, the soft hum of the ceiling fan barely registering in her mind. Her hands gripped her husband's phone tightly, her knuckles white from the pressure. The glowing screen illuminated the text messages that seemed to scream at her from the screen. Each word, each image, dug deeper into her chest like a knife she hadn't seen coming. She had suspected something was wrong for months. The late-night work meetings, the sudden evasiveness, the way John had started keeping his phone close at all times. These were red flags she tried to ignore. But now, the truth was staring back at her in the form of explicit messages exchanged between John and a woman she didn't know. It wasn't just flirtation, it was something far worse. Intimacy that had once been hers, now shared with someone else. The pictures of them, too personal and revealing, made her stomach turn with nausea and rage. Her heart raced, pounding against her ribcage so violently she thought it might burst. How long had this been going on? Why had she chosen to overlook all the signs? The pain and betrayal flooded her like an icy wave, numbing her thoughts, yet her hands trembled with anger. She read the messages again, as if hoping the words would change, that she had somehow misunderstood. But there was no mistaking them. They told a story of deception that she had never imagined possible in their marriage. The sound of keys jingling in the hallway snapped her out of her trance. John. He walked into the bedroom, humming softly, his carefree demeanor striking a deep contrast to the storm brewing inside Isabella. His suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened as if he had just had another casual day at work. He tossed his keys onto the dresser with a thud and smiled at her, completely unaware of what she had discovered. "Hey, babe, you okay?" he asked casually, his voice breaking the fragile silence. Isabella's pulse quickened even more as she stared at him. For a split second, she considered staying silent, pretending nothing was wrong. But she couldn't. The weight of what she had just seen was too heavy to ignore, too devastating to push aside. Her entire world had just been shattered, and there was no turning back from the truth. Her voice wavered as she spoke, her throat tight with emotion. "Who is she, John?" John froze. The smile that had been on his face a moment ago disappeared, and his eyes darted to the phone in her hands. His expression went from confused to terrified in a matter of seconds. He could see it now. His phone, the messages open, the evidence of his betrayal laid bare. There was no escape, no chance to lie his way out of this. His face paled, and the air between them thickened with tension. He took a step closer, his voice faltering. "Bella, I can explain." Isabella stood up, her body stiff, her chest heaving with the weight of everything she was holding inside. "No," she said, raising her hand to stop him before he could start spinning whatever excuse he had prepared. Her voice was firmer this time, though still shaky. "I don't need an explanation. I need the truth. Who is she?" John's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find the right words. His usual confidence, the ease with which he had charmed her for years, was gone. He looked like a man caught in the middle of a wreck he had caused, trying to figure out how to salvage what little he could. But there was nothing left to save. The truth was out, and the damage was irreversible. It was a mistake," he finally stammered. "It's not what you think. Stop." Isabella's voice cracked with the weight of her pain. She couldn't bear to listen to his half-hearted excuses. Every word felt like another betrayal, another slap in the face. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I didn't notice all the late nights, the distance? Do you really think I don't understand what I just read?" John's eyes pleaded with her, but the guilt and panic were obvious. He knew he was losing her. "Bella, please. I didn't mean for it to happen. I made a mistake, but it's over now. We can fix this." Isabella let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to her own ears. "Fix this? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and you think we can just fix it? Like nothing happened?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry in front of him. Not now. Not after everything he had done. She had always believed in the strength of their marriage, had always fought for them, even through the rough patches. But now, she realized, she had been fighting for something that didn't exist anymore. John had destroyed it, piece by piece, with every lie, every betrayal. John reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her arm, but she stepped back. The distance between them was no longer just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. Something deep inside her had broken, and she knew it could never be mended. Her voice was softer now, but resolute. "I'm done, John. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything is okay. I can't trust you. And without trust, we have nothing." John looked as though he might argue, but the look in her eyes must have told him it was useless. She had made up her mind. There was no going back from this. In the eerie silence that followed, Isabella turned away from him, walking toward the closet. Her body felt heavy, each step taking more effort than the last. She pulled out a suitcase and began to pack, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't just packing for the night. She was packing to leave. Leave the house, leave John, leave the life they had built together. John watched her, his face etched with disbelief. "Bella, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can work through this." But Isabella didn't stop. She folded her clothes methodically, her mind numb. The memories of their life together, the good times, the love they had once shared, flashed through her mind like fleeting shadows, but they no longer held any power over her. The betrayal had erased all of it, leaving behind only a hollow ache. "I'm leaving tonight," she said quietly, zipping up the suitcase. "I'm not just leaving you, John. I'm leaving this city, this life. I can't stay here anymore." John's eyes widened in shock. "You can't just leave. This is your home." Isabella paused, staring at him for a long moment. "No, John. It was our home, but it stopped being mine the moment you betrayed me." With that, she lifted her suitcase and walked out of the bedroom. John didn't follow. He stood frozen, watching her go, as the weight of his choices came crashing down around him. Isabella didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her decision was final. She was done with him, with this life. As the front door closed behind her, Isabella stepped out into the cool night air, her breath shaky but her mind clear. She had no idea where she was going, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was leaving. She was free. And with that, her new life, the one she would build for herself, without John, began. Chapter 2. A Fresh Start. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella had packed her life into a single suitcase and left behind everything she once thought was permanent. She had driven for hours, letting the hum of the highway and the endless stretch of road calm the storm of emotions within her. And now, standing at the edge of her new beginning, she felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. The city was nothing like the one she had left behind. Here, the air felt lighter, as if even the wind didn't carry the weight of her past. She stepped out of the taxi, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. It was October, and the leaves had already begun to turn golden, lining the streets in bursts of color that contrasted with the pale blue sky above. Isabella looked around at the unfamiliar streets, her heart pounding with the thrill of possibility. Her new apartment was modest, a one-bedroom space, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The building was older, with ivy climbing the brick exterior and a small communal garden where a few residents sat sipping coffee. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy, and more importantly, it was hers. It was the first place she had chosen for herself, without compromise or consideration for anyone else's needs. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the bare walls and empty rooms greeted her, waiting for her to fill them with new memories. She placed her suitcase down on the hardwood floor and stood in the middle of the living room, absorbing the quiet. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint, a clean slate for a new life. Isabella walked over to the large window that overlooked the street below, watching as people strolled by, couples hand in hand, children riding bikes, the steady hum of the city beginning to feel more like home with each passing minute. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and settling in. Isabella took her time arranging her new space, carefully placing the few possessions she had brought with her. She bought second-hand furniture from a local shop, spending hours deliberating over what felt right. The couch was soft, the coffee table worn but charming, and the bedroom, though simple, became her sanctuary. She hung soft curtains, and on the windowsill, She placed a few potted plants, green life she hadn't thought to care for in years. There was a quiet joy in these small acts. It felt like putting herself back together piece by piece, claiming this space as her own. The apartment became her safe haven, a place that held no memories of John, no echoes of betrayal. Here, she could be whoever she wanted to be. Once she had settled in, the city began calling to her, inviting her to explore its every corner. The unfamiliar streets became her playground as she wandered through them, eager to discover what this new life had to offer. She spent her mornings strolling along tree-lined avenues, stopping by vibrant cafes where the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the crisp autumn air. The baristas began to recognize her, offering a warm smile as they prepared her drink, and the little cafes soon became her regular stops. On Saturdays, Isabella would make her way to the local artisan markets. Stalls were filled with handcrafted jewelry, pottery, and paintings, each piece telling a story of the artist who made it. The market buzzed with life, a mix of chatter and laughter, the air filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and spices. Isabella wandered between the stalls, touching the smooth ceramics, admiring the intricate details of the jewelry, feeling connected to the creative energy around her. These markets reminded her of the love she had once had for art, before life, before John, had swept her away from her own creative passions. One morning, she found herself in a tiny bookstore nestled between two towering buildings. The smell of old books wrapped around her like a comforting blanket as she browsed the shelves. She picked up a novel at random, flipping through the pages before settling into a corner chair to lose herself in its world. Hours passed, but she didn't notice. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't looking at the clock, wasn't thinking about anyone but herself. These days, filled with discovery, were exhilarating. Every new street, every unfamiliar face, was like shedding the layers of her old life. She had no history here, no painful memories to haunt her, no expectations to weigh her down. In this new place, she was free to be whoever she wanted. Yet, despite the freedom, loneliness often crept in like a shadow when the city's bustle quieted down. At night, when the streets emptied and the sounds of the city faded, the silence in her apartment felt vast. The bed, though comfortable, felt too big for just her. Sometimes, she would wake in the middle of the night, reaching out instinctively for the familiar warmth of John, only to remember that he wasn't there. He would never be there. Again. It was during these moments that doubt began to whisper in the back of her mind. Had she made the right choice? Could she really build a new life on her own? The weight of starting over felt heavier in the dark, when there was no one to distract her from the gnawing questions. But Isabella refused to let the loneliness win. She reminded herself that this was just the beginning, that the discomfort was part of the process of rebuilding. So, she pushed herself to take the next step. She started attending local events, community meetups, art workshops, and even a cooking class. She wanted to meet people, to form connections in this new city that would help root her in place. One afternoon, while browsing a local bulletin board outside a coffee shop, she saw a flyer for a painting workshop. The image of a paintbrush splashing vivid colors across a canvas sparked something inside her. She hadn't painted in years. She had always loved it, creating something from nothing, expressing herself in ways words never could. But somewhere along the way, she had lost that part of herself. Now, standing there, staring at the flyer, she felt a pull toward that forgotten passion. The following Saturday, she found herself in a small, sunlit studio surrounded by easels and paints. The room buzzed with creativity as people of all ages dipped their brushes into the paint, splashing color onto blank canvases. Isabella felt nervous at first, unsure if she could still do this, but as soon as she dipped her brush into the paint and made that first stroke, something inside her awakened. Her hand moved with instinct, creating bold, sweeping strokes across the canvas. She let the colors guide her, mixing and blending them in ways she hadn't planned. It felt chaotic, raw, and beautiful. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about anything else, just the colors, the movement, the creation in front of her. As the workshop ended, Isabella stood back and looked at her painting. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. A piece of herself she had forgotten was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Leaving the studio that day, Isabella felt a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the painting, though that had been a part of it. It was the realization that she could still create, still find joy in the things that had once made her feel alive. This city, this fresh start, was helping her rediscover parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of her old life. As the days turned into weeks, Isabella continued to explore her new world. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, rediscovering her passions, making connections, and, slowly but surely, building a life she could call her own. The road ahead still held uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to see where it would lead. Chapter 3. Finding Her People. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city as Isabella walked toward the art studio. The streets were alive with the sounds of evening, distant chatter from nearby restaurants, the hum of cars passing by, and the occasional clink of glasses from a cafe terrace. It had been a few weeks since Isabella's first painting workshop, and tonight was another opportunity for her to immerse herself in the colors and textures that had become her refuge. The studio was alive with creativity the moment she stepped inside. The smell of acrylic paint filled the air, and the soft rustling of brushes against canvas created a calming rhythm. Isabella smiled, feeling at ease in this space that had become her sanctuary. She set up her station, adjusting her easel and preparing her paints, already thinking about the piece she wanted to create tonight. Something abstract, something that would allow her emotions to flow freely onto the canvas. As she squeezed paint onto her palette, she overheard a burst of laughter from the corner of the room. She turned to see a group of 3 women, all around her age, gathered around an easel, to admire the colorful, abstract piece she had just completed. Swirls of vibrant reds, oranges, and purples intertwined with cool blues and greens, representing the clash of emotions she had experienced since her move. She had poured everything into it, her anger, her sadness, her hope, and as she stood there, taking it all in, a realization hit her. She hadn't thought about John in weeks. The betrayal that had once consumed her thoughts now felt distant, like a chapter of her life she had long since turned the page on. She was no longer defined by the hurt he had caused her. She was no longer the woman trying to pick up the pieces of her broken marriage. She was Isabella, an artist, a friend, and someone who was building a life entirely her own. The sense of freedom that washed over her in that moment was overwhelming. She had done it. She had left behind the life that had once held her back, and in its place, she had created something beautiful. Chapter 4. Passion Reawakened. 6 months had passed since Isabella left her old life behind, stepping into the unknown with nothing but hope and a deep yearning for change. In those months, she had blossomed into someone unrecognizable from the person she used to be. The woman who once lived in the shadow of her marriage was gone. In her place stood a vibrant, confident, and inspired individual. One of the most profound changes in her life was her reconnection with art. What had once been a quiet hobby, a way to escape, had now become a vital source of expression and empowerment. Early on, Isabella started attending painting workshops in the city, immersing herself in the process of learning and growth. Each stroke of the brush became more purposeful, more fluid, as she experimented with new techniques and different mediums. Art, which had been a whisper in her soul for so long, now screamed with boldness and color. Soon, her artwork caught the attention of others, gallery owners, artists, and collectors. Her pieces were raw and evocative, each one a reflection of her journey. She channeled the pain of betrayal, the uncertainty of starting over, and the exhilaration of discovering herself into every canvas. The more she created, the more the city noticed. A local gallery owner approached her after one workshop, offering her a spot in an upcoming group exhibition. That opportunity would change everything. The night of the exhibit arrived with equal parts excitement and nervousness. Isabella stood in the gallery, surrounded by white walls adorned with her vibrant paintings. Each piece was a window into her soul, exposing her deepest emotions to strangers. As the first guests trickled in, mingling and admiring the artwork, Isabella felt her heart race. Would people understand what these paintings represented? Would they connect with the pain, healing, and renewal she had tried to capture? But as the evening unfolded, the tension melted away. Guests lingered around her work, their gazes lingering on each piece as if they were drawn into her story. Some offered kind words, others shared how they saw their own struggles mirrored in her art. Isabella felt a rush of pride and validation as one of the gallery curators introduced her to a buyer who was interested in purchasing one of her largest canvases. It was a moment she would never forget, the first time she realized her art had value beyond herself. By the end of the night, she had sold 3 paintings, made connections with local artists, and even received an invitation to participate in a solo exhibit later in the year. As she walked home from the gallery under the glow of the city's streetlights, Isabella's heart swelled with gratitude. Her art had always been a form of therapy, but now it was becoming something much bigger, her way of impacting others and making her mark on the world. Over the following months, her confidence soared. She not only continued to create and exhibit her art, but also started teaching workshops, eager to share her passion with others. Leading a room full of eager learners, chatting animatedly. They were a vibrant trio, each with their own distinct style. One wore a flowing bohemian dress, another had a sleek, modern look, and the third had her hair in loose, carefree curls. They exuded energy, and their laughter was infectious. "Hey, I'm Chloe." The woman in the bohemian dress waved her over with a friendly smile. "You're new here, right?" Isabella hesitated for a moment, not used to such openness from strangers, but something about their warmth pulled her in. She walked over, feeling a little shy but grateful for the invitation. "Yeah, I am. I'm Isabella. Nice to meet you." "This is Nia." Chloe pointed to the woman with the yoga-like calm and natural grace. "And that's Sarah." She gestured toward the woman with the loose curls, who gave Isabella a smirk that seemed to promise a wicked sense of humor. "Welcome to the madhouse," Sarah said with a wink. "We come here to pretend we're artists, but really it's just an excuse to drink wine and gossip." Nia chuckled softly. "Speak for yourself, Sarah. I come for the meditation that is painting, but the wine doesn't hurt either." Isabella couldn't help but smile. Already, she could tell this group was a lively mix of personalities. Chloe, with her vibrant spirit and passion for all things artistic. Nia, with her serene energy and love for balance. And Sarah, with her sharp wit and laid-back attitude. They seemed to complement each other perfectly, and Isabella felt a small flicker of hope that maybe she had found her people. Before long, they had pulled her into their circle, and the evening flew by in a blur of laughter, paintbrushes, and conversation. Chloe was an entrepreneur, running a successful handmade jewelry business, always full of ideas and enthusiasm for new projects. Nia taught yoga classes, and her calm, grounded presence radiated through everything she did. Sarah was a single mom with a biting sarcasm that matched Isabella's own sense of humor. The 4 of them clicked instantly. By the end of the night, they were sharing stories over glasses of red wine, the atmosphere relaxed and welcoming. Isabella found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in months. Deep, genuine laughter that seemed to bubble up from a place she thought had been lost forever. It was as if, for the first time since leaving John, she had found a sense of belonging, a group of people who didn't know her as the woman whose husband had betrayed her, but simply as Isabella. Chloe leaned over and clinked her glass against Isabella's. "You're one of us now. We're dragging you everywhere. Music festivals, art shows, food fairs, you name it." Isabella laughed, raising her glass. "I'm in." From that night on, the 4 of them became inseparable. Chloe, Nia, and Sarah showed Isabella the vibrant side of the city she had only begun to discover. They introduced her to local music festivals, where the streets were alive with the sounds of live bands, and food fairs that filled the air with the scent of spices and freshly baked treats. They dragged her to intimate art shows tucked away in the city's backstreets, where artists displayed their work in hidden galleries. Isabella found herself swept up in the energy of it all, her heart swelling with gratitude for these new friendships. Every outing was an adventure, and with each one, Isabella felt herself coming alive again. The city's creativity and culture breathed new life into her, and her passion for painting, something she had buried under the weight of her marriage, was reignited. She threw herself into her art with renewed energy. Her paintings became bold, expressive pieces that reflected her emotional journey. The strokes on the canvas were no longer controlled or measured. They were wild, full of color and emotion. Some pieces were chaotic, reflecting the pain and confusion she had felt during her breakup with John. Others were soft and hopeful, capturing the sense of healing and rediscovery that had begun to take root in her heart. One night, after weeks of work, she stood back, filled her with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Through these workshops, Isabella realized that art wasn't just a personal journey, it was a communal one. It brought people together, healed wounds, and allowed people to express things they couldn't put into words. Her volunteering at community events became more frequent, often organizing art-based activities to bring people closer. Whether it was painting murals at local festivals or guiding children through their first canvas, Isabella's presence in the city grew. She had gone from being a stranger in a new place to a pillar of the local art scene. Her personal life thrived as well. The friendships she had formed with Chloe, Nia, and Sarah had deepened into something resembling a sisterhood. The four women supported each other through everything, from career milestones to heartbreaks and everything in between. They spent their weekends trying out new restaurants, attending live music shows, and laughing over late-night wine. Their bond was unshakable, a constant source of joy in Isabella's life. Despite the challenges she had faced, Isabella was thriving. She had built a life she loved in a city that had embraced her. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole, content, and excited about the future. But as much as she had moved forward, life had a way of testing how far one had truly come. As Isabella stood on the edge of this new, flourishing chapter, she had no idea that her past, the one she thought she had left behind, was about to come knocking in the most unexpected way. Chapter 5. The Festival Encounter. The annual summer festival had a magical energy that seemed to pulse through every corner of the city. Isabella had heard about it for months, and now that the day had arrived, she felt like she was stepping into a dream. Streets once familiar were now transformed into vibrant, bustling avenues filled with music, laughter, and the tantalizing sense of street food. Colorful banners draped between lampposts, and performers danced through the crowds, their costumes shimmering in the afternoon sun. Isabella walked arm in arm with her friends, Chloe, Nia, and Sarah, taking it all in. The energy of the festival was infectious, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude to be experiencing it for the first time with these women, her newfound family. They meandered through the crowds, stopping to sample local delicacies from food stalls and admiring the handmade crafts on display. Music from a live band echoed from a nearby stage, adding to the festival's electric atmosphere. As they wandered toward the heart of the celebration, Isabella found herself drawn to a section where the streets had been decorated with vibrant murals and art installations. The colors were bold, dynamic, much like her own artwork. She smiled to herself, feeling a rush of inspiration as she admired the talent on display. But just as she turned to point out a particularly striking piece to Chloe, her heart skipped a beat. There, not more than a few feet away, stood John. For a split second, the world seemed to stop moving. Time slowed, and all the sounds around her faded into the background. John, her ex-husband, the man she had left behind in her old life, was standing in the middle of her new one. He looked as surprised as she felt, his eyes widening as he recognized her. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Memories of their life together flashed before her, the good, the bad, and everything in between. But the emotions that had once overwhelmed her were now distant, like a story she had read long ago. The pain of his betrayal, the devastation of leaving, the nights spent wondering how she would ever rebuild. All of it felt like another lifetime. John approached slowly, as if unsure whether she was real. His steps were tentative, and as he drew closer, Isabella noticed the subtle changes in him. His face looked worn, his eyes tired. He no longer had the confident, self-assured air that had once drawn her to him. Instead, there was a hesitance in his gaze, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Bella, is that really you?" His voice was soft, barely audible above the sounds of the festival. Isabella's heart clenched for a moment, hearing the name he used to call her, a name that no longer felt like hers. She nodded, her expression calm, but her voice steady as she corrected him. "It's Isabella now." John blinked, clearly taken aback by her response. He seemed to study her, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that suggested he hardly recognized the woman standing before him. And perhaps he didn't. Isabella knew she had changed in more ways than one. The woman he had known had been broken, unsure of herself, but the woman standing in front of him now, she was whole. "You look different," John finally said, his words slow, as though he was still trying to process what he was seeing. "This place, your life, it seems so different from what you remember?" Isabella finished for him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. There was no malice in her tone, just a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had built something beautiful out of the ashes of her past. John hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment as he searched for the right words. "I didn't expect to see you here. I've been thinking about you, about what happened." Isabella remained silent, her eyes steady on him, but she said nothing. She could see the weight of regret in his expression, the lines etched into his face that spoke of time past and mistakes realized. But the power he once had over her was gone. She didn't need his apology anymore, didn't need his validation or his regret. She had moved beyond all of that. "I was wrong," John admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. His vulnerability was stark, standing there in the middle of the vibrant festival, the backdrop of life and color only highlighting the brokenness in his words. "I made a mistake, Bella. I miss you." There it was. The moment she had once dreamed of, the moment when he would realize his mistake, when he would regret everything and want her back. But now, standing before him, she felt nothing but peace. The life she had built here, the person she had become, it was enough. More than enough. She didn't need him to complete her anymore. Isabella looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "I'm glad you've come to terms with what happened, John, but I've moved on. I'm happy now. Truly." John's eyes searched hers, as if trying to find some trace of the woman who had once loved him, but the realization began to settle on his face. "Is there no chance we could start over?" he asked, his voice laced with the faintest trace of hope. She shook her head gently. "No. This life, my life, it's better without you in it. And that's okay. We both have to move forward." Her words hung in the air between them, final but not cruel. Isabella could see the understanding dawning on his face, the slow acceptance of the truth. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of closure. This chapter of her life was well and truly over, and it didn't hurt anymore. John looked down for a moment, as if gathering himself, before finally nodding. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and this time it felt genuine, like an apology not just for her but for himself. With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Isabella standing amidst the vibrancy of the festival, surrounded by life. She exhaled, a long, cleansing breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. Chloe, Nia, and Sarah approached her, concern etched on their faces, but Isabella smiled at them reassuringly. "I'm okay," she said, and for the first time, she truly meant it. Chapter 6. New Horizons. The festival encounter was a turning point for Isabella, though perhaps not in the way she would have expected. Seeing John again didn't stir up old wounds or reignite unresolved feelings. Instead, it brought a sense of finality, a closing of the book on that chapter of her life. She had given him, and herself, the closure they both needed. In the days that followed, Isabella's life continued to blossom. Her art flourished in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Her work began to gain attention from galleries beyond her local scene, and she was soon planning her first solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery in the city. The pieces she had created since her move spoke of her journey, her healing, and her rediscovery of herself. Each painting was a testament to her resilience, and people connected with the raw emotion in her work. Her friendships with Chloe, Nia, and Sarah deepened even further. They celebrated her victories, supported her through challenges, and filled her days with laughter and warmth. The city had become her home, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. Isabella also expanded her community work, leading art workshops for underprivileged children and volunteering at local events. She found joy in sharing her passion with others, helping them find their own voice through art. Her days were filled with purpose, creativity, and connection, and she couldn't have been happier. As she sat in her studio one evening, putting the finishing touches on a piece for her upcoming exhibit, Isabella paused for a moment to reflect. The woman she had been when she first arrived in this city felt like a distant memory, a version of herself that had been broken, lost, and unsure. But now, she had transformed into someone strong, confident, and free. The pain of her past had once threatened to consume her, but in this new city, she had discovered a strength she never knew she had. Her story was no longer defined by betrayal. It was a testament to resilience, growth, and the power of starting over. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Isabella smiled. This was her new horizon, and she was ready for whatever adventures lay beyond it.